so I started out actually using it when one day I went to pick up some drugs from a guy in Longueville, and then he like he'd gone out for drinks with his mates instead of being there. So it was not reliable at all, and I thought there must be a better way of doing this. And I remembered that I'd heard about this website Silk Road from a long time ago. So then I went and did a bit more research, figured out how to do it. It's a pretty complicated process to start out with that you've got to go through to put all your coins in there and make an order, but it took me a few days and eventually I was able to successfully make an order to my house the first time. And when it came, I kind of was pretty shocked that something like this actually existed and it worked, but it was good to know that from then on I wouldn't have to try really hard to get my drugs in the future. I was initially, but I think with this kind of thing, you can do enough research that you can guarantee yourself or assure yourself really that you've taken the steps you need to protect yourself. So things like encrypting your address when you send it to a vendor, and making sure that you use vendors that pack their packages stealthily, not ordering from people that are going to get caught. You take those steps and you have a pretty good idea that you're not going to get into trouble. So no, not too worried. And also, it's a thing of quantity. I mean, if you're ordering an ounce of a drug, then it's much more likely that police are going to be interested in you than if you're ordering a gram. So that's another risk minimisation factor. Well, yeah, it's just a bit complicated even because there's different websites you need to use to go and buy them, as well as to make them properly anonymous. So that figuring out the first time is hard, but after you've done it, it just becomes a process that you can do in a few hours. And the other thing is that as bitcoins have become more of a transactable currency in the wider economy outside the darknet, it's become less of a suspicious thing to want to buy bitcoins. People invest in bitcoins all the time. A lot more businesses are accepting bitcoins as legitimate currency. So it's not really a scary thing to do anymore. It's almost just becoming run of the mill. Well, for the purposes of security, basically, you don't interact with any other sellers directly through the website at all. You can talk to them on the forums, but you've got the forums are separate to the actual purchasing website. You've got no idea who those people are going to be. With reference to the vendors, you can talk to the vendor anytime you want. You can message them, ask them about their product, ask them about how they ship things, ask them about how long they think it's going to take. If you've got a dispute with them, if something hasn't arrived, you can message them. If the quality is too low, you can message them. You can ask them anything, and they're pretty responsive, really, considering that you perceive them to be dirty criminals. They actually come across as pretty helpful people. So, yeah, a fair bit of interaction with the vendors, and I think that's important because it's part of what makes buying drugs online better than buying them on the street, that you've got a bit of a right of reply and the vendor's always there and contactable and a bit more accountable than if you were going out and doing it on the street. Well, they actually do have refund policies. It is funny that people say it's a bit like an Amazon for drugs. When something doesn't show up, usually they'll offer you a refund or a reship. I've had something not show up before from overseas, and the guy sent a reship and said it must have been seized by customs, and it came through the second time. So yeah, it's no worries, because they assume that it's their fault. Basically, if something gets taken, then that's because they didn't pack it stealthily enough. They didn't wash the package enough to avoid the drug dogs. They packed something that was obvious on X-ray. It's usually going to be their fault. So it's kind of their responsibility to send reship or refund. Relatively, I was always relatively computer savvy. I don't spend heaps of time reading about computers. I couldn't set up a computer from scratch or anything like that, but I consider myself to kind of know what's up. And I think that would be a prerequisite for doing this, just because it's a kind of a multi-step process where you've got to go through a lot of different websites. You've got to have lots of different passwords and accounts, and that there's just too many things to think about at once to not be able to do it if you weren't good with computers. Even just the terminology, like things like what's a PGP key, what's a Bitcoin address, how do you anonymize yourself using Tor, things like that. Most people would say, I've got no idea. It sounds like gobbledygook. So you need to know how to use the internet, know how to do a bit of research before you are able to use this kind of website. Yeah. Well, international vendors have a massive advantage in terms of cost and generally quality as well. I mean, people that go overseas and buy drugs on the street there will tell you that it's sometimes a tenth of the price here and twice the quality, and that's pretty much reflected on the internet as well. So there's an advantage there, but the problem is, well, shipping time's one, but it's not really that bad because who cares if you have to wait a week as opposed to 2 days if you're paying a tenth of the price. But the big issue is that Australian customs in Australia, obviously we have very strict customs. So the chance of a package making it through is not fantastic. It can work sometimes, and if vendors do their packing properly, then it should make it through. But in general, domestic's pretty advantageous, especially if you're not really worried about the money side of things, then you'd go domestic just because you don't have that risk of it being seized by the customs. The more time passes, the less daunting it becomes. Is obviously the more you do it, the more you learn about how you could protect yourself. I think that is almost a problem because it encourages complacency and it almost becomes a little bit too easy. And with all these things, it is a bit of an odds game. I mean, you just never know if one day at the post office somebody thinks something suspicious about a package and decides to open it and does go, oh, I'm going to send this to the police, and then you might be in trouble. So you're always rolling the dice, and I think that it's important to remember that you aren't buying off Amazon, you're buying off the internet drugs, but I'm not scared on a day-to-day basis, no.